The
Here's the key
operations
for the
tent
ammo.
smelled
Got
like
it.
diesel
Thanks.
fuel and stale
Check the
coffee.
scope.
The
Will do.
kind of atmosphere
go.
that had soaked into the canvas walls after 6 months of uninterrupted deployment. Major Hassan leaned over the tactical map, his weathered hands tracing the ridgeline that separated their forward operating base from the hostile territory beyond.
This the new model?
The morning
Yes,
briefing
sir.
had
Enhanced
stretched
scope.
into its second
How's the
hour,
adjustment?
and the
Smooth, sir.
23
Good.
officers
Prep it.
crammed into the space were beginning to fidget, their attention drifting toward the breakfast they'd abandoned when the emergency call came through. Outside, the valley was waking up to another day of uneasy quiet. The kind of quiet that made veterans nervous because it meant someone somewhere was planning something, and the silence was just a held breath before the storm broke. Sergeant First Class Emma Chen stood near the back of the tent, her 5'4" frame easily overlooked among the taller soldiers. She held a battered notebook against her chest, the pages filled with calculations and wind readings she'd been collecting since 0400 hours, long before anyone else had stirred from their bunks. Intelligence confirms the target is mobile, Hassan said, his voice cutting through the low murmur of speculation. Command structure relocated 3 times in the past week. They know we're watching, and they're not making it easy. He tapped a point on the map where 3 valleys converged into a natural choke point. Latest satellite imagery puts them here, approximately 4 kilometers from our northernmost observation post. Window of opportunity is 12 hours, maybe less. A captain near the front raised his hand. So, with respect, 4 clicks through that terrain. We'd need air support, and the weather report says we've got a storm system moving in by 1500 hours. Visibility's going to be 0. Hassan nodded, the lines around his eyes deepening. Which is exactly why they chose that location. They'll move under cover of the storm, and by the time it clears, they'll be 20 kilometers deeper into the mountains, beyond our operational range. He straightened, rolling his shoulders as if trying to shed the weight of impossible decisions. I'm open to suggestions. People, we've got one shot at this, maybe literally, and I need options that don't involve losing half a platoon trying to chase them through hostile territory. The tent fell into contemplative silence. Emma shifted her weight, feeling the familiar pressure building in her chest, the sensation she always got when she saw a solution that no one else had considered yet. She'd learned over her 8 years in service that speaking up too quickly got you labeled as arrogant, but waiting too long meant someone else would propose a messier, more dangerous alternative. The balance was delicate, and she'd misjudged it before, back when she'd been younger and more eager to prove herself. Lieutenant Ramirez spoke up, a decorated infantry officer who'd earned his reputation through 3 tours in some of the worst combat zones the military had to offer. What about a drone strike? We could coordinate with. Strike package was already requested. Hassan interrupted. Denied. Civilian population density in the area is too high, and after last month's incident with a wedding party, command is playing it cautious. Rules of engagement are tighter than they've ever been. Another officer suggested a night raid, but the idea was quickly dismissed when the intelligence analyst pointed out that the terrain made night operations a death trap, with narrow passes and overlapping fields of fire that would tame any approaching force into target practice. Emma listened to each proposal, mentally running the numbers, factoring in wind speed, temperature gradients, the angle of approach, the rotation of the Earth itself. The mathematics of long-range precision had always made sense to her in a way that social dynamics never quite did. She cleared her throat softly, and the sound seemed unnaturally loud in the pause between suggestions. A few heads turned, curiosity mixed with mild surprise that someone from the back was preparing to contribute. Major Hassan's eyes found hers, and she saw a flicker of recognition there. He knew who she was, even if most of the others didn't. So, Emma said, her voice steady despite the sudden attention. Request permission to speak. Hassan gestured toward the map. Sergeant Chen, please. She moved forward, and the crowd parted reluctantly, some officers stepping aside with barely concealed skepticism. She'd felt those looks before, had learned to let them slide off without leaving marks. Her fingers traced the contour lines on the map, finding the elevation markers she'd already memorized from studying the terrain models in her war phase. The target location is at approximately 2,300 meters elevation, she began, speaking to the map rather than the faces watching her. Our northern observation post is at 1,800 meters, which gives us a 500-meter elevation advantage. Current wind patterns show a consistent westerly flow at 8 to 12 knots, stronger at higher altitudes. Barometric pressure is dropping ahead of the storm system, which means the air density will decrease, affecting ballistic trajectory by approximately 3% over distance. A captain she didn't recognize let out a soft snort. "Sergeant, we're not here for a meteorology lesson. What's your point?" Emma didn't look at him. "My point, sir, is that there's a firing solution. From the northern observation post, with the right equipment and the right timing, we can neutralize the target before they relocate. One shot, clean and surgical. No collateral risk, no troop exposure." The tent erupted into a dozen simultaneous conversations. Ramirez shook his head, a smile that wasn't quite friendly playing at the corners of his mouth. "Sergeant, I don't know what you've been reading in your training manuals, but a 4-kilometer shot through mountain terrain isn't something you just decide to take on a Tuesday morning. Even our best marksman would call that a fantasy." Emma finally met his eyes. "Not a fantasy, sir. Difficult, yes, but achievable with the right calculation and execution." "Achievable?" Another officer laughed outright. "The longest confirmed kill in our battalion's history is 1,800 meters, and that was under ideal conditions by a shooter with 15 years of experience. You're talking about more than doubling that distance, through wind channels that'll throw your round off course by meters, assuming you can even see the target through the terrain." Hassan held up a hand, and the chatter died down. He was studying Emma with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between interest and concern. "Sergeant Chen, I appreciate the confidence, but Lieutenant Ramirez has a point. What you're suggesting requires capabilities that, frankly, we're not sure we have on base." "We do, sir." Emma kept her voice level, matter-of-fact. "I've been mapping that valley for 3 months. I know every wind channel, every thermal current, every variable that affects ballistics at that range. I've taken shots at 3,200 meters in training conditions. This is within operational parameters." The skepticism in the room shifted into something colder, more pointed. A grizzled master sergeant near the front crossed his arms. "Training conditions. Kid, training is shooting at paper targets that don't shoot back. This is a high-value target in a hot zone, and you're saying you can just pick up a rifle and make a miracle shot because you've been doodling in a notebook." Emma felt the familiar tightness in her jaw, the defense mechanism that kept her expression neutral even when every instinct wanted to fire back. She'd learned that responding to disrespect with anger only confirmed their prejudices, gave them ammunition to dismiss her as emotional, unstable, not ready for the real work. Instead, she opened her notebook and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to Major Hassan. "My qualification scores from last quarter, sir," and a reference from the Advanced Marksmanship Program at Fort Benning. Hassan unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the rows of numbers. His eyebrows rose fractionally, a tell that Emma had learned meant genuine surprise. He passed the paper to Ramirez, who read it with increasing attention, his earlier smirk fading into concentration. "These scores," Ramirez said slowly, "these are instructor level. Some of them are higher than I've ever seen outside of specialized units." He looked up at Emma, reassessing. "Sergeant, what exactly is your background?" Emma hesitated. She'd learned that credentials could cut both ways, either opening doors or painting targets on your back when jealousy and resentment took root. "I was selected for the Precision Engagement Program 3 years ago, sir. Completed advanced training in long-range interdiction, specialized in high-altitude mountain warfare scenarios. Before that, I spent 18 months as a designated marksman in the 173rd Airborne." The tent had gone quiet again, but this time the silence carried a different weight. Hassan set the paper down on the map table, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm against the wood. "The 173rd. You were in the Korengel." "Yes, sir. 2 deployments." She didn't elaborate, didn't mention the citations that had come from those deployments, the missions that had earned her a reputation in certain circles as someone who could put rounds on target when everyone else was just making noise. Some of the officers in the tent were starting to make connections now, pieces clicking into place as they remembered reports they'd read, stories they'd heard secondhand about an operator who'd earned the unofficial call sign Ghost for the way she seemed to vanish into Overwatch positions and emerge only when the job was done. Ramirez was nodding slowly, a new respect coloring his expression. Wait, Chen, you're the one who made that impossible shot in the Watapia Valley. Took out the mortar team that had 2nd Battalion pinned down for 6 hours. Emma didn't confirm or deny, just held his gaze steadily. She'd learned that silence often served better than words. Let people draw their own conclusions without her having to sound like she was bragging. Hassan picked up the paper again, studying it with renewed interest. Sergeant, if I authorize this, you understand that you're betting your career on one trigger pull? If this goes wrong, if there's any collateral damage, any mistake in your calculations, it's not just your reputation on the line. It's mine, and everyone else's in this tent. I understand, sir. Emma's voice didn't waver. I wouldn't request the authorization if I wasn't certain I could deliver. The master sergeant who'd called her kid earlier spoke up, his tone more measured now. So, even if Sergeant Chen has the skills, we're still talking about unprecedented range for this kind of operation. One shot, one opportunity. What happens if environmental conditions change? What if the target moves at the last second? Emma turned to address him directly. Then I don't take the shot, Master Sergeant. I've been trained to recognize when the window is viable and when it's not. If conditions aren't perfect, I abort and we fall back to alternative plans. But if the window opens, I can guarantee the result. Guarantee? Another officer scoffed. Sergeant, nobody can guarantee anything in combat. That's the first thing they teach you. They also teach you to know your capabilities and not exceed them, Emma replied calmly. I know mine. I've spent 3,000 hours behind a rifle in conditions worse than what we're facing today. I've made shots that other people said were impossible, and I've walked away from shots that looked easy but weren't. I'm not asking for faith, sir. I'm asking for authorization to do the job I was trained to do. Hassan looked around the tent, gauging the reactions of his officers. Some were still skeptical, the body language closed and defensive. Others were leaning forward, intrigued despite their reservations. He'd built his reputation on making hard calls, and Emma could see him weighing the options, calculating the risks against the potential rewards. If we don't take this shot, Emma added quietly, the target disappears, and command structure in this region stays intact. More operations, more casualties on our side, more months of grinding attrition. One clean shot ends that cycle. It's not about ego or proving a point. It's about making the smart tactical choice. The Major's fingers stopped drumming. He looked at Emma for a long moment, and she saw the decision forming behind his eyes. How long would you need to prepare? 4 hours to set up at the observation post, sir. Final calculations will depend on real-time conditions, but I'll be ready to take the shot whenever the target presents. Hassan folded the paper and handed it back to her. You get your authorization, Sergeant, but I'm sending Lieutenant Ramirez with you as spotter and mission commander. This goes through proper channels, proper protocols. You will have continuous communication with this command post, and if at any point I determine the risk profile has changed, I'm pulling you back. Clear. Crystal clear, sir. Ramirez stepped forward, extending his hand. Emma shook it, feeling the calluses that marked him as someone who'd spent his own time behind weapons. Looks like we're partners, Sergeant. Let's make sure we both walk away from this with a win. That's the plan, sir. Hassan dismissed the briefing, and the tent emptied in a rush of activity as officers scattered to coordinate logistics, alert the observation post, and prepare for an operation that most of them still didn't quite believe was possible. Emma stood by the map table for a moment, letting the adrenaline settle into something more sustainable. She'd done the hard part, convinced command to take the risk. Now came the harder part, delivering on the promise. Ramirez waited until the tent was empty except for the two of them and Hassan. Sergeant, I'm going to be honest with you. I've seen a lot of talented shooters over the years, and most of them could talk a good game right up until the moment they had to perform under real pressure. I read your scores. I heard about Watapia, and I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. But 4 kilometers is a different universe. If you have any doubts, any at all, now's the time to say so. Emma met his eyes without flinching. No doubts, sir. Just a request. Name it. I'll need access to the Armorer's precision rifle inventory. My personal weapon is excellent, but for this range, I'll want something with a longer barrel and higher ballistic coefficient. And I'll need to test fire it before we move to the observation post. 3 rounds, just to confirm zero and validate my calculations. Hassan nodded. Done. Ramirez, coordinate with Master Sergeant Powell at the armory. Give Sergeant Chen whatever she needs. He looked at Emma, and for the first time, she saw something like approval in his expression. Sergeant, I don't know if you realize how many people are about to be watching this. You pull this off, you're going to be a legend. You fail, well. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I don't do this for legends, sir, Emma said quietly. I do it because it's the mission. Hassan smiled faintly. That's exactly why I'm letting you try. They left the operations tent together, stepping out into the harsh morning sunlight. The base was already buzzing with activity as word spread about the authorized mission. Soldiers paused in their routines to watch Emma and Ramirez walk toward the armory, and she could feel the weight of their speculation, their curiosity mixed with skepticism. She'd felt it before, dozens of times, and she'd learned to tune it out, to focus on the work rather than the audience. The armory was a reinforced concrete structure half buried in the hillside, its thick walls designed to contain any accidental detonations. Master Sergeant Powell was waiting for them at the entrance, a barrel-chested man with a reputation for treating weapons with more care than he showed most people. He'd been in the service for 28 years, and his knowledge of firearms was encyclopedic. Heard you planning something ambitious, Sergeant Chen, Powell said as he unlocked the heavy door. 4 clicks, they're saying. That true? 4.2? Actually, Emma replied. Depends on the exact firing position. Powell whistled low. Well, let's see what we can do to give you a fighting chance. He led them into the armorer's climate-controlled interior, rows of weapon racks stretching into the dimness. He moved directly to a locked cabinet at the rear, spinning the combination lock with practiced ease. I've got 3 rifles that might fit your requirements. All of them are match-grade precision instruments, chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, which should give you the velocity and stability you need at extended range. He pulled out the first rifle, a sleek weapon with a black synthetic stock and a barrel that seemed almost impossibly long. This is a Macmillan TAC-50. 50-inch barrel, bolt-action, 5-round magazine. It's heavy, over 26 pounds fully loaded, but it's accurate out to distances most people wouldn't believe. We've had it for 6 months, barely used because, frankly, nobody here has the skill set to maximize its potential. Emma took the rifle, feeling its weight settle into her hands. She worked the bolt, checking the smoothness of the action, then brought it to her shoulder, sighting down the barrel at an imaginary target. The balance was good, the cheek well comfortable. She could feel the quality in every component, the precision engineering that went into creating a tool capable of sending rounds accurately across distances where gravity and wind turned ballistics into advanced physics. This will work, she said. What's the barrel twist rate? 1 in 10 inches, Powell replied. Optimized for heavier projectiles. I've got match-grade ammunition, 265 grain rounds with a ballistic coefficient of .73. You'll get excellent sectional density and wind resistance. Ramirez was examining the other rifles in the cabinet, clearly impressed despite himself. Sergeant, you ever fired one of these before? Similar platform during training, Emma said. Different manufacturer, but the operating principles are the same. I'll need that test fire to confirm zero and get a feel for the trigger pull, but I can adapt. Powell nodded approvingly. Smart. Never trust a weapon you haven't personally validated, I always say. He handed her a box of ammunition, the brass cases gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Range is about half a click west of here. Take your time, do it right. This isn't a weapon you rush. They walked to the range, a cleared area backed by a natural hillside that served as a bullet trap. The wind was picking up, flags along the range dancing and snapping as the morning breeze strengthened. Emma could feel it on her skin, gauging the speed and direction instinctively. 15 knots, gusting to 20, coming from the southwest. Not ideal conditions, but manageable. She set up at the 500-meter line, the furthest target available on the range. It wasn't anywhere close to the distance she'd be shooting in the actual mission, but it would give her enough data to validate the rifle's zero and confirm her calculations for bullet drop and wind drift. Ramirez set up beside her with a spotting scope, ready to call corrections. Emma loaded a single round into the chamber, feeling the smooth metal slide into place. She settled into a prone position behind the rifle, finding her natural point of aim, letting her body relax into the shooting stance she'd practiced for thousands of hours. Her breathing slowed, deep and rhythmic. Her heart rate dropped from 70 beats per minute to 55, a physiological response she'd trained herself to achieve through years of practice. The target at 500 meters was a standard circle, 12 inches in diameter, marked with concentric rings. Through her scope, it looked impossibly small, just a dark dot against the hillside. She knew that in the actual mission, her target would be even smaller, just the vital zone of a human torso at more than 4,000 meters. The mathematics of it were daunting for most people, but for Emma, there were just problems to solve. She calculated the wind drift in her head, factoring in the distance, the wind speed, the ballistic coefficient of the round. 0.8 mils of correction, maybe 0.9 to account for the gusting. She adjusted her aim, settling the crosshairs just to the left of center, and began her breathing cycle. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Halfway through the exhale, she held, finding that moment of perfect stillness between breaths where the body became a stable platform. The trigger broke cleanly, and the rifle roared, the massive report echoing off the hillside. The recoil pushed back into her shoulder, significant but manageable, and she kept her eye in the scope, watching for the impact. Through the magnification, she saw the dust kick up just as the bullet punched through the target, dead center in the innermost ring. Dead center hit, Ramirez called out, his voice carrying a note of surprised respect. That's a cold bore shot in 15-knot winds at 500 meters. Most shooters would be happy with that on their third or fourth round. Emma worked the bolt, ejecting the spent case and loading a second round. That's the baseline. Now let's see if it repeats. She made a tiny adjustment to her scope, compensating for the slight drift she'd observed, then settled back into position. The second shot felt identical to the first, the same smooth trigger break, the same controlled recoil. The bullet struck less than an inch from the first hole. Powell, who'd been watching through binoculars, let out a low whistle. "Sergeant, I've been running this armory for 12 years, and I've never seen anyone shoot that rifle with that kind of consistency right out of the gate. You've got a gift." "Not a gift," Emma said, loading her third and final test round. "Just practice." The third shot completed a triangle barely larger than a quarter at 500 meters. She stood, brushing dust from her uniform, and began breaking down the rifle for transport. "The weapon is zeroed and validated. We're good to move." Ramirez folded his spotting scope, his earlier skepticism completely erased. "Sergeant, I owe you an apology. When you stood up in that tent and made your pitch, I thought you were either crazy or overconfident. I've seen what you can do now, and I'm starting to think maybe 4 kilometers isn't as impossible as I thought." Emma didn't respond to the compliment directly, just secured the rifle in its transport case and picked up the ammunition box. "So, we should move to the observation post. I want to be in position with at least 2 hours to spare before the target window opens." They drove north in a battered Humvee, the roads gradually deteriorating from packed gravel to little more than dirt tracks carved into the mountainside. The observation post was one of the most remote positions on the base perimeter, manned by a rotating team of 4 soldiers whose job was to watch the valley and report any movement. It was lonely work, hours of boredom punctuated by occasional moments of terror when hostile forces tested the boundaries. Specialist Marcus Webb was the senior soldier at the post, a lanky kid from Minnesota who'd extended his deployment twice because, as he put it, the mountains felt more like home than Minneapolis ever had. He met them at the entrance, a reinforced bunker carved into the rock with narrow firing slits overlooking the valley below. "So, Sergeant, he greeted them, his curiosity obvious. We got word you be coming up. Something about a special mission. Need to borrow your real estate for a few hours, Specialist, Ramirez said. Sergeant Chen is going to be taking a long-range shot from your position. Webb's eyes widened. How long-range are we talking? Long enough that you're probably going to want to watch, Ramirez replied with a slight smile. Emma moved past them into the observation post, her attention already focused on the tactical problem ahead. The post had a commanding view of the valley, exactly as she'd expected from studying the maps. She could see for kilometers in every direction, the terrain rolling away in layers of ridgelines and draws. Somewhere out there, more than 4,000 meters distant, was her target. She just had to find it, calculate the solution, and execute. She set up her rifle at the primary firing slit, a narrow opening that gave her a clear field of fire while keeping her protected from return fire. Through her scope, the valley looked peaceful, almost serene, with no signs of the war that had been grinding through these mountains for years. But Emma knew that peace was an illusion. Somewhere down there, enemy commanders were planning operations that would cost lives, and it was her job to stop them. Ramirez set up the spotting scope beside her, adjusting the tripod until he had a stable platform. Webb and his team hovered near the back of the bunker, trying to look busy while clearly fascinated by what was unfolding. Emma ignored them all, her focus narrowing to the task ahead. She pulled out her notebook, flipping to the pages where she'd recorded wind data, temperature variations, and barometric pressure readings over the past 3 months. The target area is at bearing 035 degrees, distance 4,200 meters, she said, more to herself than anyone else. Elevation difference is 480 meters, giving us a downward angle of approximately 6.5 degrees. Current temperature is 18 degrees Celsius, humidity at 42%, barometric pressure is 998 millibars and dropping. Ramirez glanced at his own instruments, confirming her numbers. Wind. Emma had already pulled out her handheld anemometer, taking readings at their position. 12 knots here. But that's not what matters. The valley creates a Venturi effect through the central pass. I'd estimate 18 to 22 knots at mid-range, potentially higher in the upper thermals. She pointed to a spot on the map. There's a seasonal stream bed about 2,000 meters out. You can see the vegetation pattern changes where the moisture is different. That'll create a temperature gradient, which means the air density changes right where my round will be transitioning from supersonic to subsonic flight. Ramirez looked at her with something approaching awe. You've mapped the entire ballistic environment. For 3 months, every day, Emma confirmed. I've been watching this valley because I knew eventually we'd need precise fire support out here, and I wanted to be ready when that moment came. She began making entries in a small ballistic computer, a ruggedized device that looked like an oversized calculator. Her fingers moved quickly across the keys, inputting variables that most shooters would never even consider. Webb approached cautiously, his curiosity overcoming his deference to rank. Sergeant, permission to ask a question. Go ahead, Specialist. I've been stationed here for 4 months, and I've never seen anyone pay that kind of attention to wind patterns and temperature gradients. What made you start collecting all that data? Emma continued her calculations as she spoke. When I was going through advanced training, my instructor told me something that stuck with me. He said that amateurs practice until they get it right, but professionals practice until they can't get it wrong. The only way to guarantee success at extended range is to eliminate as many variables as possible before you ever pull the trigger. That means understanding the environment so completely that you can predict how it'll affect your round. But 4,000 meters, Webb pressed. That's beyond what most people would even attempt. Most people aren't trained for it, Emma replied simply. I am. She finished entering data into the ballistic computer and studied the readout. Based on current conditions, I'm looking at a bullet flight time of approximately 4.8 seconds. Total drop will be around 820 inches, which is 68.3 feet. Wind drift at 20 knots will push the round approximately 140 inches right. That's 11.6 feet. Then I need to factor in the Coriolis effect because of the Earth's rotation, which at this latitude and bearing adds another 4 inches of drift. Ramirez whistled softly. Sergeant, most shooters would look at those numbers and walk away. Most shooters weren't trained by Master Gunnery Sergeant Diaz at the Precision Engagement Program, Emma said. Is the one who taught me that every shot is just a math problem. You identify the variables, you calculate the solution, and then you execute. The distance doesn't matter if you've done the work beforehand. She settled behind the rifle, beginning the process of familiarizing herself with the shooting position. Every location was different, every firing point had its own characteristics that could affect shot placement. She needed to understand how the concrete floor might vibrate if someone walked nearby, how the ambient light through the firing slit would affect her scope picture, how the air currents flowing through the bunker might create microvariations in the bullet's initial trajectory. Time crawled forward. Emma ran through her mental checklist repeatedly, confirming and reconfirming every calculation. She studied the target area through her scope, memorizing the terrain features, identifying landmarks she could use for reference. The enemy command post was supposedly located in a cluster of buildings near a distinctive rock formation that locals called the Dragon's Tooth, a spire of stone that rose above the surrounding structures like a natural monument. Through 25-power magnification, she could just barely make out the buildings, tiny rectangles of lighter color against the darker mountainside. At this distance, individual people would be invisible until they moved, and even then, they'd be little more than dark pixels against the background. It was a shot that defied conventional wisdom, that pushed the boundaries of what most military marksmen believed was possible. But Emma had made impossible shots before. She'd learned early in her career that the difference between possible and impossible was usually just a matter of preparation and will. At 1,130 hours, her radio crackled to life. Major Hassan's voice came through, steady and professional. Ghost, this is Overwatch. Intelligence confirms target is on site. Multiple vehicles observed at the primary location within the last 15 minutes. Window is opening. Emma keyed her radio without taking her eye from the scope. Overwatch, Ghost copies. Standing by for target confirmation. Ramirez adjusted his spotting scope, scanning the target area with methodical precision. I've got movement, he said quietly. Multiple individuals near the main building. They are setting up what looks like communications equipment on the roof. That's our confirmation, Emma said. Command structure wouldn't expose themselves unless they felt secure. They think the storm system will cover their movement, and they're getting ready to relocate. Hassan's voice came back. Ghost, you are authorized to engage when ready. Take your time. Make it count. Emma didn't acknowledge immediately. She was watching the wind flag she'd mentally placed across the valley, using dust devils and vegetation movement to gauge the wind speed at various distances. The breeze was steady for now, but she could see darker clouds building to the west, the leading edge of the storm system that would close her window within the next few hours. Range is 4,210 meters, she said softly, speaking for the benefit of Ramirez's official log. Wind is 18 knots at shooter position, estimated 21 knots at mid-range, dropping to 15 knots at target. Temperature has risen 2 degrees since we arrived, which will increase air density by approximately 0.3%. Adjusting calculations accordingly. Her fingers moved across the ballistic computer again, fine-tuning the solution. The mathematics were complex, involving differential equations that accounted for dozens of interacting variables, but she'd done these calculations so many times that they'd become almost instinctive. She could feel the right answer before the computer confirmed it, a sixth sense developed through thousands of hours of practice. I'm seeing what looks like a senior officer, Ramirez said, his voice tight with concentration. Distinctive uniform, surrounded by 3 individuals who appear to be providing security. Is moving toward the communications equipment. Emma found the figure in her scope. At this distance, even through maximum magnification, the person was barely recognizable as human, just a dark shape against the lighter building. But the body language was unmistakable, the confidence of someone accustomed to command, moving without the cautious awareness that characterized soldiers operating in hostile territory. She made her final adjustments to the scope, dialing in the corrections for elevation and windage. 68 feet of bullet drop meant she was aiming at a point high above her actual target, essentially pointing the rifle at empty sky and trusting the ballistics to carry the round down onto target. 11 feet of wind drift meant she was aiming far to the left, so far that if someone watched her firing position, they'd think she was shooting at an entirely different location. Wind shift, Ramirez warned, picking up a gust from the southwest. Emma had already seen it, had already factored it into her solution. The valley's topography channeled winds in predictable patterns, and she'd studied those patterns until she could anticipate changes before they fully developed. Compensated, she replied calmly. She settled into her final shooting position, letting her body relax into the stance she'd practiced until it became as natural as breathing. Her left hand supported the rifle's forend. Her right hand wrapped around the grip with exactly the right amount of pressure, firm enough for control, but not so tight that it would induce tremors. Her cheek welded to the stock at precisely the same spot it had touched 1,000 times before, giving her a consistent scope picture. Her breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped. The world narrowed to the circle of her scope, to the tiny figure more than 4 kilometers away who had no idea that death was about to arrive on a precisely calculated trajectory. She began her breathing cycle. Inhale through the nose, 4 seconds. Hold, 2 seconds. Exhale through the mouth, 6 seconds. The extended exhale triggered her parasympathetic nervous system, slowing her heart rate even further, creating a window of stability between beats where her body became perfectly still. Inhale. Hold. Exhale halfway. Hold. In that moment of perfect stillness, Emma's finger took up the slack in the trigger, applying steady rearward pressure with the pad of her index finger. She trained herself to be surprised by the break, to never anticipate it, because anticipation led to flinching and flinching led to missed shots. The trigger broke like glass, clean and sharp. The rifle roared, the massive cartridge igniting with a flash that briefly illuminated the interior of the bunker. The recoil slammed into Emma's shoulder, significant but controlled, absorbed by her body position and the rifle's design. She kept her eye in the scope, maintaining her sight picture, watching for the impact. The round left the barrel at approximately 2,800 feet per second, spinning at over 2,000 revolutions per second from the rifle's barrel twist. It climbed into its arc, following the trajectory Emma had calculated, rising above the line of sight as it ate up the distance across the valley. 4.8 seconds. That's how long the bullet would take to reach the target, an eternity in combat time, long enough for a million things to go wrong. The target could move. A sudden wind gust could push the round off course. A bird could fly through the trajectory. Emma had accounted for every variable she could control, but there were always factors beyond anyone's ability to predict. At 2,000 meters, the bullet passed through the temperature gradient Emma had identified near the seasonal stream bed. The change in air density altered its trajectory by exactly the amount she'd calculated, bending the path downward by a few additional inches. At 3,000 meters, it transitioned from supersonic to subsonic flight, the shock wave that had been trailing the bullet suddenly dissipating as it dropped below the speed of sound. The wind pushed against it, a constant force trying to deflect the round from its path. But Emma had aimed 11 feet to the left, and the wind drift brought the bullet back toward center, exactly as planned. The Coriolis effect tugged it slightly further left, the rotation of the Earth itself influencing the round's flight, and Emma had compensated for that too. At 4,000 meters, the bullet was dropping fast, gravity pulling it down toward the target. Emma had aimed at the sky, but now the round was plummeting toward Earth at a steep angle, carrying all the kinetic energy of its initial velocity converted into downward momentum. 4.7 seconds after the shot, the bullet impacted. Through her scope, Emma saw the distant figure suddenly collapse, there one moment and gone the next. No dramatic movements, no Hollywood theatrics, just instant transition from standing to falling, the way it always happened at extended range when the round arrived long before the sound of the shot. "Hit," Ramirez called out, his voice sharp with excitement and disbelief. "Holy God, that's a confirmed hit. Target is down. I repeat, target is down." The radio exploded with chatter. Hassan's voice cut through the noise. "Ghost, Overwatch. Confirmed target neutralized. Emma was already working the bolt, chambering another round in case a follow-up shot was needed. Through her scope, she watched the target area dissolve into chaos. The security personnel who'd been surrounding the officer were scattering, diving for cover, trying to understand where the shot had come from. The communications equipment crashed to the ground as someone kicked it aside in panic. Overwatch, Ghost. Confirmed single shot, single kill. Target is neutralized. Observed secondary target scattering, no follow-up shots required. The observation post had gone silent behind her. Webb and his team were staring at her like she'd just performed magic, their faces slack with disbelief. Even Ramirez, who'd watched her shoot the test rounds and had started to believe she could pull it off, looked stunned by what he'd just witnessed. Emma saved her rifle and stood, rolling her shoulders to release the tension that had built up during the shot sequence. Her hands were steady, her breathing already returning to normal. She felt the familiar post-shot calmness, the satisfaction of a job executed exactly as planned. Distance was 4,210 meters, she said matter-of-factly, pulling out a notebook to record the shot details. Bullet flight time 4.8 seconds, as calculated. Wind drift compensation was accurate within estimated parameters. Single shot, clean neutralization, no collateral damage observed. Ramirez stood slowly, his legs seeming unsteady. Sergeant, I just watched you do something that I would have said was impossible 6 hours ago. That wasn't just a good shot. That was probably the longest confirmed kill in this entire theater of operations. It was the shot the mission required, Emma replied, uncomfortable with the praise. She'd never been good at accepting compliments, had always felt like acknowledgement somehow diminished the work itself, turned it into a performance rather than a duty. Webb found his voice. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. We've been watching that valley for months, and enemy forces have been using that position because they thought they were beyond engagement range. You just proved them wrong in the most definitive way possible. Emma was already breaking down her rifle, preparing it for transport. Specialist. Incredible isn't the word I'd use. Necessary is more accurate. We had a mission requirement, and we met it. Now we need to pack up and get back to base before that storm system closes in. But even as she spoke, she could hear the radio chatter escalating. Hassan was on the line with higher command, and she caught fragments of conversation that made it clear word of the shot was already spreading through the chain of command. Someone mentioned her call sign, Ghost, and she heard another voice asking for confirmation of the distance. 4,200 meters, more than 2.5 miles. A shot that pushed the boundaries of what military precision fire was thought capable of achieving. They loaded the gear into the Humvee and began the drive back to base. The storm clouds were moving in faster now, and Emma could smell rain on the wind. They made it just in time. Another hour and visibility would have been zero, the target lost behind curtains of precipitation. Ramirez drove in silence for the first few kilometers, his hands tight on the wheel. Finally, he spoke. Sergeant, can I ask you something? Of course, sir. When you stood up in that briefing and told us you could make that shot, did you have any doubts? Any moment where you wondered if you were promising something you couldn't deliver? Emma considered the question carefully. I'd be lying if I said I never have doubts, Lieutenant. Every shooter does, no matter how much training they have. But I've learned to separate doubt from assessment. Doubt is emotional. It's fear disguised as caution. Assessment is analytical. It's looking at the variables and calculating probability of success. When I analyzed this mission, the assessment told me I could execute it. So I didn't let the doubt have a voice. That's a hell of a distinction, Ramirez said. Most people can't separate those things. Most people haven't spent 8 years training themselves to think like a rifle scope instead of a human being, Emma replied with a slight smile. It's not always a healthy way to approach life, but it works for the job. They reached the main base as the first drops of rain began to fall. Emma could see that word had definitely spread, because there was a crowd waiting near the operations tent, soldiers who should have been busy with their own duties but had found reasons to be in the area when the Humvee pulled up. Hassan emerged from the tent, and behind him came other senior officers, their faces showing a mixture of respect and curiosity. Emma climbed out of the Humvee, instinctively uncomfortable with the attention. She'd always preferred to work in the background, to be the invisible piece of the tactical puzzle that made mission success possible. Being the center of attention felt wrong, like she'd somehow violated the unspoken rule that operators should be seen through their results, not their presence. Hassan approached, and there was something different in the way he carried himself now, a deference that hadn't been there this morning. "Sergeant Chen, I just got off the line with Theater Command. They've confirmed your shot through drone observation. The target was a high-value individual, someone we've been tracking for 6 months. Intelligence estimates that neutralizing him will disrupt enemy operations in this region for at least the next quarter, maybe longer." Emma nodded, accepting the information without visible emotion. "Glad the mission was successful, sir." "Successful?" Hassan let out a short laugh. "Sergeant, you just set a record. 4,210 meters under combat conditions. That's going to be studied at military academies. They're going to use your shot as a case study for what's possible with proper training and preparation." "Sir, with respect, I'd prefer if my name wasn't attached to any case studies," Emma said quietly. "I'm more useful when I'm not famous. Reputation makes you predictable, and predictable operators are liabilities in hostile territory." Hassan studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I can understand that. But you should know that recognition is coming whether you want it or not. Theater Command is already drafting a citation. You're going to be recommended for a commendation." Emma felt a familiar discomfort settle over her. "So, I was doing my job. The same job I'm trained to do. I don't need a medal for that." "Maybe not," Hassan agreed, "but the military needs heroes, Sergeant. We need people who can look at impossible odds and figure out a way to win anyway. You gave us that today, and whether you like it or not, you're going to inspire a lot of people who might have thought their own limitations were fixed." Before Emma could respond, the Master Sergeant who'd questioned her in the briefing approached. His earlier skepticism had been completely replaced by genuine respect. "Sergeant Chen, I owe you an apology. When you spoke up this morning, I dismissed you as inexperienced and overconfident. I was wrong, and I'm man enough to admit it. What you did today was extraordinary, and I'm honored to have witnessed it, even if only through the after-action reports." Emma extended a hand. "No apology needed, Master Sergeant. Skepticism is healthy in our line of work. It keeps people from making promises they can't keep. I just happen to be able to keep mine." Others approached, and Emma found herself in the uncomfortable position of having to accept congratulations from people who doubted her hours earlier. She answered their questions patiently, explained her methodology without arrogance, and deflected praise whenever possible. But even as she spoke, part of her mind was already moving forward, thinking about the next mission, the next challenge. Lieutenant Ramirez pulled her aside during a lull in the conversations. "Sergeant, I want you to know that what I saw today changed the way I think about what's possible. I've been in this military for 12 years, and I thought I understood the limits of human capability. You showed me I was wrong, and I'm grateful for that lesson." "Sir, you were a good spotter today," Emma replied. "Mission success wasn't just about the shot. It was about having someone I could trust to call conditions and keep me informed. You did that job flawlessly." Ramirez smiled. "You're generous with credit, Sergeant. That's another mark of a true professional." He hesitated, then continued. "Can I ask what you're going to do after this deployment? Someone with your skills could write their own ticket to any specialized unit in the military. Delta, SEALs, specialized mission units. They'd all fight to have you." Emma looked out at the valley, now obscured by rain and low clouds. "Honestly, sir, I haven't thought that far ahead. I focus on the mission in front of me, and when that's done, I focus on the next one. Long-term planning has never been my strength." "Maybe you should start thinking about it," Ramirez suggested. "You have a gift, Sergeant, and gifts like yours shouldn't be wasted on routine deployments. You could be training the next generation, developing new techniques, pushing the boundaries of what precision engagement can achieve." "Maybe," Emma said noncommittally. "But right now, I'm here, and as long as I'm here, there's work to be done." The rain intensified, and the crowd began to disperse as soldiers returned to their duties. Emma made her way to the armory, returning the TAC-50 to Master Sergeant Powell, who greeted her with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "Sergeant, that rifle just made history today," Powell said as he carefully inspected the weapon. 4,200 meters. "I've been working with precision rifle for my entire career, and I've never heard of a confirmed kill at that distance in combat conditions." "The rifle performed flawlessly," Emma acknowledged. "Your maintenance standards are excellent, Master Sergeant." The weapon was perfectly zeroed, and the ammunition was consistent across all 3 test rounds. That made my job significantly easier. Powell beamed at the compliment. "Coming from you, Sergeant, that means something. I heard you were trained by Gunny Diaz at the Precision Engagement Program. That man is a legend in marksmanship circles." "He's a good instructor," Emma agreed. "Demanding, but good. He taught me that weapons are tools, and like any tool, they're only as effective as the person using them. You keep the tools in perfect condition, which means operators like me can focus on execution rather than worrying about equipment failure." She completed the weapon turn-in paperwork and headed to her quarters, a small room in one of the prefabricated buildings that housed non-commissioned officers. The space was Spartan, just a bunk, a footlocker, and a small desk where she kept her notebooks and reference materials. Emma sat on the edge of the bunk, feeling the adrenaline finally beginning to fade, replaced by the deep fatigue that always followed high-stress operations. Her mind replayed the shot sequence, analyzing every detail, looking for areas where she could have been more efficient or more precise. It was an automatic process, one she'd developed over years of practice. Every shot was a learning opportunity, every mission a chance to refine technique. She pulled out a notebook and began writing, recording observations while they were still fresh. Wind estimation was accurate within 0.5 knots. Temperature gradient calculation was confirmed by observed bullet trajectory. Trigger control was smooth, no indication of flinch or anticipation. Recommend increasing practice time with TAC-50 platform to improve familiarity with recoil characteristics. A knock on the door interrupted her documentation. She opened it to find Specialist Webb, looking slightly nervous. "Sorry to disturb you, Sergeant. I just wanted to say thank you." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Thank me for what, Specialist?" "For showing me what's possible," Webb said earnestly. "I've been in the service for 3 years, and I've been doing my job competently, but I've never really pushed myself to excellence. Watching you today, seeing the level of preparation and focus you brought to that mission, it made me realize that I've been settling for good enough when I should be striving for exceptional." Emma stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "Specialist, competence is undervalued in our culture. Everyone wants to be exceptional, but the military runs on competent people doing their jobs reliably day after day. There's no shame in that." "Maybe not," Webb agreed, "but I think I've been using competence as an excuse not to challenge myself. You could have told Major Hassan that the shot was beyond your capabilities, and nobody would have judged you for it. Instead, you took on a challenge that terrified everyone else, and you succeeded because you'd done the preparation when nobody was watching." Emma considered his words. "You're right that the preparation happened when nobody was watching. I didn't collect 3 months of wind data because I thought it would impress anyone. I did it because I knew that eventually the mission would require that knowledge, and I wanted to be ready when the moment came. That's the difference between people who succeed at difficult tasks and people who fail. It's not about talent or luck. It's about being so prepared that success becomes inevitable." Webb nodded slowly. "That's what I needed to hear. Thank you, Sergeant." He hesitated at the door, then turned back. "One more thing. When you were setting up that shot, you looked completely calm. No stress, no visible nervousness. How do you do that? How do you stay cool when the pressure is that intense?" Emma thought about her answer carefully. "Pressure is just the gap between expectation and preparation, Specialist. If you're not prepared, the expectations feel crushing. But if you've done the work, if you know in your bones that you're ready, then pressure becomes something else. It becomes focus. It becomes clarity. I wasn't calm because I'm naturally unflappable. I was calm because I knew I'd done everything possible to prepare for that moment, and there was nothing left to worry about except execution." "That's profound," Webb said. I'm going to remember that. After he left, Emma returned to her documentation. But her mind kept drifting back to the conversations, to the way people's perceptions had shifted in the span of a single trigger pull. This morning, she'd been a relatively unknown sergeant with impressive qualifications but no real reputation. Now, she was someone people would remember, someone whose name would circulate through unofficial channels, building a mythology that would eventually become disconnected from reality. She'd seen it happen to other operators, the way success could become a burden when expectations grew beyond any human's ability to consistently meet them. One perfect shot became the standard against which all future performance would be measured. The fear wasn't failure itself. It was failing after everyone had decided you were incapable of it. The rain continued through the evening, heavy and steady. Emma ate dinner in the mess hall, enduring more congratulations and questions from soldiers who wanted to understand how she'd made the impossible shot. She answered patiently, explained her methodology, and consistently redirected credit to her training and preparation rather than any innate talent. That night, lying in her bunk listening to the rain hammer against the roof, Emma thought about Lieutenant Ramirez's question. What would she do after this deployment? She'd been in the military for 8 years, had served in some of the most challenging environments the service had to offer. She'd earned respect, had proven her capabilities beyond any doubt. But what came next? The specialized units Ramirez had mentioned were possibilities, certainly. She had the skills and the temperament for that level of work. But she also valued the relative anonymity of conventional forces, the ability to be excellent without becoming a celebrity within the military community. Special operations had a way of putting people under microscopes, turning operators into symbols and symbols into targets. Teaching was another option. She could go to one of the military's sniper schools, pass on her knowledge to the next generation. There was appeal in that, the idea of multiplying her impact by creating more operators who could perform at her level. But teaching required a patience for repetition that Emma wasn't sure she possessed. She'd built her skills through solitary practice and personal discipline, and she wasn't confident she could inspire those qualities in others. Or she could stay exactly where she was, taking on missions as they arose, building competence across a range of operational environments. There was something to be said for being the quiet professional, the person command could rely on to handle the tasks that fell outside normal operational parameters. The questions followed her into sleep, unresolved but not urgent. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges. The future could wait. She dreamed of wind and distance, of bullets arcing across impossible spaces, of targets that materialized and vanished like ghosts in mountain valleys. When she woke before dawn, the rain had stopped and the valley was wrapped in fog so thick that visibility dropped to less than 50 meters. She dressed quietly and made her way to the operations tent, knowing that Hassan ran his briefings early. The tent was already occupied when she arrived. Hassan looked up from his maps and coffee, offering a tired nod. Sergeant Chen, you up early? Couldn't sleep, sir. Thought I'd see if there was anything on the schedule. Hassan gestured to a chair. Actually, I'm glad you're here. We got intelligence overnight. Your shot yesterday had ripple effects we didn't anticipate. Enemy forces in the region are scattered. Their command structure is in chaos, and there's been radio chatter suggesting they are pulling back from forward positions because they don't know if we have other assets capable of reaching them at extended range. Emma absorbed this information. So one shot created uncertainty across their entire operational area. Exactly. They thought they understood our capabilities, had calculated safe distances based on historical engagement ranges. You fundamentally changed that calculation, and now they are second-guessing every position they've established. Hassan sipped his coffee. Theater Command wants to capitalize on this. They are asking if you'd be willing to take on additional long-range interdiction missions while the enemy is still disorganized. How many missions are we talking about, sir? That depends on targeting opportunities. Could be 2 or 3, could be more. The key is maintaining the pressure, keeping them off balance, preventing them from re-establishing a coherent command structure. Emma considered the implications. More missions meant more exposure, more opportunities for something to go wrong. But it also meant leveraging a tactical advantage they created through yesterday's success. I'm willing, So, but I'll need continued access to precision equipment and the freedom to abort missions if conditions aren't optimal. I won't take shots just to maintain pressure if the probability of success is below my standards. Agreed. You have full discretion on target selection and timing. I trust your judgment, Sergeant. Hassan pulled out a folder. There's something else. Theater Command wants to debrief you personally, wants to understand your methodology so they can incorporate it into training programs. They're talking about flying you back to headquarters for a few days. Emma shook her head. So, with respect, I'd prefer to stay operational. If they want a debrief, they can send someone here. I'm more valuable in the field than I am in a conference room talking about theory. Hassan smiled slightly. I told them you'd say that. They are sending a training development officer here instead. Should arrive in the next 48 hours. You'll need to walk them through your preparation process, your calculation methodology, everything that went into yesterday's shot. I can do that, sir, as long as it doesn't interfere with operational readiness. It won't. I'll make sure of it. Hassan stewed, walking to the map on the wall. Sergeant, you did something remarkable yesterday. You proved that with proper preparation and skill, we can reach targets that were previously considered beyond our capabilities. That's going to change how we think about tactical problems in this theater. You should be proud of that. Emma joined him at the map, studying the terrain features she'd come to know so well. So, I'm just glad the mission was successful. Pride seems like the wrong response when we're talking about combat operations. Maybe, Hassan conceded. But recognition of excellence isn't about pride, Sergeant. It's about understanding your own capabilities so you can continue to grow them. You've shown us what you can do at 4,000 meters. Now the question is, what else is possible? Emma traced a finger along a ridgeline on the map, her mind already calculating angles and distances, identifying positions that might offer even more challenging opportunities. I guess we'll find out, sir. As the sun rose over the valley, burning off the morning fog, Emma returned to the observation post. The soldiers there greeted her with a respect that bordered on reverence, and she spent an hour answering their questions about technique and preparation. Webb had clearly been talking to his team, because they'd started keeping their own wind logs, recording data with the same methodical attention Emma had demonstrated. You've inspired them, Ramirez said, joining her at the firing slit where she'd made yesterday's shot. They see excellence as attainable now, not just something that happens to other people in other places. Emma watched the valley, peaceful in the morning light, giving no indication of the violence it had witnessed yesterday. Excellence is always attainable, sir. It just requires more work than most people are willing to invest. If seeing what's possible motivates them to put in that work, then maybe something good came from yesterday beyond the tactical outcome. You sell yourself short, Sergeant. What you did was more than just execution. It was artistry. There's a reason your call sign is Ghost. You appear, you complete the impossible, and then you fade back into the background like you were never there. Emma didn't respond immediately. She was thinking about the metaphor, about the idea of being a ghost. There was truth in it, and perhaps that was the path forward. Not seeking recognition or advancement, but continuing to be the operator who appeared when the mission required capabilities that existed at the edge of possibility. The military needed people who could do the impossible. But more than that, it needed people who could do the impossible and then return to being ordinary, who could carry excellence without letting it become ego. That was the balance Emma had always tried to maintain, and it was the balance she would continue to seek as her career evolved. She stood at the firing slit for another moment, then turned away from the valley. There would be more missions, more shots that pushed the boundaries of what precision fire could achieve. But for now, there was equipment to maintain, data to analyze, and preparation to complete for whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. Because that was what professionals did. They didn't rest on past victories. They prepared for the next impossible task, knowing that somewhere out there, another mission was forming. Another moment was approaching when someone would need to look at 4,000 meters of empty air and calculate a solution. And when that moment came, Emma Chen would be ready. Not because she was exceptional, though she was. Not because she sought glory, because she didn't. But because she'd done the work, made the preparations, and refused to accept that impossible was anything more than a challenge waiting to be solved. She walked back toward the main base, the morning sun warm on her face, ready for whatever came next. Behind her, the valley stretched silent and still, holding its secrets, waiting for the next time someone would need to reach across impossible distance and change the course of events with a single, perfect shot. That was her gift to the mission, her contribution to the cause. Not speeches or inspiration, but the quiet confidence that when the moment demanded excellence, she would deliver. And in the end, that was enough. The training development officer arrived 2 days later, a Captain Rebecca Torres from the Army Marksmanship Unit, carrying a briefcase full of recording equipment and an expression that suggested she'd heard the stories but didn't quite believe them. Emma met her at the operations tent, where Hassan made introductions with a kind of formality that indicated this debrief mattered to people far up the chain of command. "Sergeant Chen," Torres said, extending her hand. "I've read your file 3 times, and I still can't quite reconcile the person on paper with what you accomplished here. 4,210 meters isn't just a record, it's a paradigm shift in what we thought was operationally feasible." Emma shook her hand, noting the calluses that marked Torres as someone who'd spent serious time behind a rifle herself. "Captain, the shot was the result of preparation and favorable conditions. I'm not sure there's much paradigm shifting about doing your homework and waiting for the right moment." Torres smiled, but there was something sharp behind it, the look of someone who recognized deflection when she heard it. "Sergeant, false modesty doesn't serve anyone. I'm here because the Army wants to understand exactly what you did, how you did it, and whether we can replicate your methodology across our precision engagement programs. That means I need you to be honest about your capabilities, not humble." Emma appreciated the directness. She gestured toward the corner of the tent where she'd set up her materials, notebooks and ballistic computers and weather instruments arranged with the same precision she brought to everything else. "Then let's get started. I'll walk you through the entire process, from initial reconnaissance to trigger pull." They spent 6 hours going through every detail. Emma explained her 3-month data collection process, showing Torres the wind logs and temperature records and barometric pressure readings she'd compiled. She demonstrated her ballistic calculation methodology, walking through the differential equations that accounted for bullet drop, wind drift, Coriolis effect, and a dozen other variables most shooters never even considered. Torres recorded everything, asking sharp questions that revealed she understood the underlying physics and tactics. When you were calculating the temperature gradient effect near the stream bed, she asked at one point, "How did you confirm your estimates? You couldn't exactly walk out there with a thermometer." "Visual observation," Emma replied. "I watched the vegetation patterns, the way heat shimmer appeared at different times of day, the behavior of birds and insects that are sensitive to thermal variations. You learn to read the environment like a text, every detail telling you something about conditions." Then I cross-referenced with satellite thermal imaging data that intelligence had collected for other purposes. The combination gave me confidence in my calculations. "That's not just marksmanship," Torres observed. "That's fieldcraft at a level most people never develop. Where did you learn those observational skills?" Emma hesitated, then decided honesty was warranted. Some of it came from formal training, but most of it came from necessity. When I was starting out, people didn't always take me seriously. I learned that the only way to overcome skepticism was to be so thoroughly prepared that my competence became undeniable. That meant developing skills beyond just shooting, meant becoming someone who understood every aspect of the operational environment. Torres nodded slowly. "So the excellence wasn't just about proving yourself to others. It was about proving yourself to yourself." "Maybe," Emma admitted. "Or maybe it was about eliminating doubt as a variable. When you're about to take a shot that could affect mission outcomes and lives, you can't afford to wonder if you've done enough preparation. You need to know, with absolute certainty, that you've accounted for everything within your control." They broke for lunch, eating field rations in companionable silence. Torres seemed to be processing everything she'd learned, occasionally making notes in her own notebook. Finally, she spoke. "Sergeant, I'm going to be recommending some significant changes to our training programs based on what I've learned here. But I want to ask you something off the record. Emma looked up from her meal. Go ahead. Do you think what you did can actually be taught? Or is there some element of natural ability that can't be replicated through training alone? It was a question Emma had asked herself many times. I think the technical skills can absolutely be taught. The mathematics, the observation techniques, the equipment proficiency, all of that is trainable. But there's something else, something harder to quantify. It's the willingness to take responsibility for an outcome when the margin for error is essentially zero. That psychological component, I'm not sure that can be taught. I think it has to be chosen. Torres considered this. Chosen how? Every time you step up to a difficult shot, you're making a choice, Emma explained. You're choosing to accept the possibility of failure, to put your reputation and your confidence on the line. Some people make that choice once and decide the risk isn't worth it. Others make it repeatedly, and each time they succeed, it gets a little easier to make the choice again. That's not talent, that's character. And character is built through decisions, not training programs. That's going into my report, Torres said. Because I think you've identified why some shooters plateau at competent while others become exceptional. It's not about the technical skills, it's about the willingness to continually test yourself against increasingly difficult challenges. They spent the afternoon on the range, with Emma demonstrating her shooting process in real time. Torres watched through a spotting scope as Emma made 3 consecutive shots at 1,200 meters, each round landing within a 6-inch group despite gusty winds. The captain's respect was evident in her silence, the way she simply observed without commentary, recognizing mastery when she witnessed it. As the sun began its descent toward the western ridgeline, they returned to the operations tent for final questions. Hassan joined them, clearly interested in Torres's assessment. Major, your sergeant is exactly what her file suggested, Torres said. She's a generational talent with world-class technical skills and the temperament to perform under extreme pressure. But more than that, she's developed a methodology that could fundamentally change how we approach long-range precision engagement. I'm recommending that Sergeant Chen be brought to Fort Benning to help redesign our advanced marksmanship curriculum. Emma felt her stomach tighten. This was the conversation she'd been dreading, the moment when her preference for operational work would collide with the Army's institutional needs. Captain, with respect, I'd like to remain in an operational role. My skills are current because I'm using them in real-world conditions. Teaching would take me away from that. Torres had clearly anticipated the objection. Sergeant, I understand your concern. But consider this. You could create 50 operators with capabilities approaching your own. The force multiplication of that would exceed anything you could accomplish individually, no matter how many missions you complete. Or I could create 50 operators who learn techniques but never develop the judgment to apply them properly, Emma countered. Excellence isn't just about replicating methods. It's about understanding when to apply them and when to walk away. That comes from experience, not classroom instruction. Hassan had been listening quietly, but now he spoke. What if there was a compromise? Sergeant, what if you spent 6 months at Benning, helped develop the curriculum, trained a cadre of instructors who could carry your methodology forward? Then you return to operational status, continue building your own experience while knowing you've seeded the force with your knowledge. Emma studied her commander's face, seeing the logic even as she resisted the idea of leaving fieldwork. 6 months wasn't forever, and if she could genuinely help develop better training, could prepare other operators to face the challenges she'd encountered, maybe that was worth the temporary sacrifice. 6 months, she said finally, and I wanted in writing that I return to operational status afterward, no administrative delays or reassignments. Hassan extended his hand. You have my word, Sergeant. 6 months, then back to the work you love. Torres was smiling now, clearly pleased with the outcome. Sergeant Chen, I think this is the beginning of something important. Your shot 3 days ago proved what's possible. Now we're going to make sure that possibility becomes replicable reality across the force. As Torres packed up her equipment and prepared to return to headquarters, Emma walked out into the evening air. The valley was peaceful, the light golden as it slanted across the ridge lines. Somewhere out there, Enemy forces were still reeling from the loss of their commander, still trying to understand how their safe distance had become a kill zone. One shot had changed the tactical equation for an entire region. And now, apparently, one methodology would change how the army trained its precision shooters. Emma wasn't sure how she felt about that legacy, about the idea that her name would be attached to curriculum and doctrine. She'd always preferred to be anonymous, to let her work speak louder than her identity. But maybe Torres was right. Maybe excellence had an obligation to replicate itself, to ensure that the next generation didn't have to reinvent everything from scratch. If Emma could compress her 8 years of learning into a 6-month training program, could give other operators a head start toward mastery, perhaps it was a responsibility she couldn't ethically decline. She returned to her quarters and pulled out her notebook, beginning to sketch the outline of what such a training program might look like. Not just technical instruction, but the philosophical framework, the mental discipline, the character development that separated competent shooters from exceptional ones. It would be challenging, trying to codify knowledge that she'd acquired through intuition and experience. But challenges were what Emma had built her career on. 6 months at Fort Benning. Then back to the field, back to the work that made her feel most alive. It was a compromise she could accept, a temporary detour in service of a larger purpose. And when she returned to operational status, she'd come back with the satisfaction of knowing she'd multiplied her impact, had created a legacy that extended beyond her individual achievements. The ghost would fade into teaching for a brief season, then re-emerge sharper and more experienced than ever. And somewhere in that journey, Emma suspected, she'd discover whether her gift was truly Hayes alone, or whether it could be passed on to those willing to do the work, make the sacrifices, and choose excellence over comfort. That night, she slept deeply, dreaming not of shots taken but of shots yet to come, of a future where impossible distances became routine calculations, where the next generation of operators would stand on her shoulders and reach even further than she had dared to imagine.